Good morning. Peace, or as I would say, shalom. My name is Elijah. I want to talk to you this morning. Come to share some time with you. I love this country setting. You know, I'm a country boy too. I come from Gilead. Not a whole lot is known about me, but I do come from Gilead. I am a Tishbite, and you may not know what that is. Sometimes it's hard to explain. But God has sent me on some fantastic adventures. But often, God used me to speak truth to power and to stand before the authorities of the day. When I think back about what God did with me, I stand in amazement. Do you mind if I share some of the experiences that I had this morning with you? I've learned so much from God, although I often wonder why God chose someone like me to do so much for Him. Years ago, I was minding my own business, hanging out in Gilead, when God spoke to me. He said, go to King Ahab and stand before him, because I have a message for him through you. And so I went to Ahab, as God had told me, and I proclaimed that there would be a drought. I said to Ahab, as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, there shall be no dew nor rain these years except at my word. God sometimes gave me boldness to stand in front of kings. I received a message again from the Lord. The Lord told me, He said, go by a brook in Cherith. And so I went. I went to the brook because I knew it was vitally important that I go there, because God had told me. And at the brook, God sent ravens twice a day with bread and meat. Now, you think eating from the mouth of ravens is a bad thing, but listen, I'm a country boy. I've eaten worse. But eating by the mouth of ravens wasn't that bad. I sat there and took a time of retreat and rest because God had big plans for me. I stayed there until the brook dried up. See, what God did is God called me out of nowhere to go somewhere for Him. And all the places I would be able to go for Him. All the places that He would send me and the people that He would send me to stand before. But I wonder why God would choose someone like me to be a messenger for Him. I was sitting by that dry brook, and God spoke again. I received the word of the Lord, and He told me to go to Zarephath, and that I would find a widow there. When I saw that widow, she was gathering sticks, and I called to her, and I said, give me that cup of water in your hand. And so, as she was on the way to give me the water, I called out again, and I said, and the morsel of bread in your hand. And she said to me, as the Lord God lives, I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little jar of oil. And see, I'm gathering up a couple sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat and die. I thought that was a little extreme. She was just going to eat those things and die, and that would be it. But I told her not to fear. But she needed to make that small cake and give it to me first, and then bring it to me, and then make some for herself and her son. And I told her that she would not run out of flour nor oil, and God would multiply and sustain her until He sent rain again. She listened to me. I stayed there many days with that widow and her son. We ate together, and the flour never ran out, nor did that jar of oil run dry. But while I was there with them, the boy, he became sick. He was so ill, he was no longer breathing. She said to me, "What have I to do with you, O man of God, that you come to me and bring my sin to remembrance and kill my son?" I told her, "Give me your son." I went over there and I picked that boy up. I took him up to the upper room where I had been staying. I laid him on the bed and I prayed over him. And I cried out to God. I did this 3 times. And God revived this boy. And I took the little boy down to his mother from the upper room, and I laid him in her hands and said, "Your son lives." She responded. She said, "By this, I know that you are a man of God, that the word of the Lord that is in your mouth is truth." God sent me to that widow and her son. I don't know what God was doing in that, but I'm glad he used me to do it. I wonder why God chose someone like me to minister to that widow and her son. After a while, God called out to me again. He told me to go back to Ahab, but there was no rain for 3 years, and there was a severe famine in the land. The famine was so severe in Samaria that Ahab had sent his servant Obadiah out. And he and Obadiah were looking for a place that they might find a spring in order that their livestock would drink from that spring, because if their livestock did not drink and eat around that spring, they would have to kill them. And as I was on my way to see Ahab, I met Obadiah. And Obadiah, he was a God-fearing man. What he had done is he had taken these prophets of God, these one who stand for God, and he hid 100 of them in 2 caves, 50 in one and 50 in the other. And he gave them water, and he gave them food to sustain them, because Jezebel, Ahab's wife, wanted to kill and destroy them. So Obadiah feared the Lord. And he did this to hide them away so that they would not be killed. But when I saw him, he fell on his feet before me. He said, "My Lord, my master, you have come." But he was worried. He was worried that if he went and told Ahab that Elijah was here and the Spirit of the Lord had taken me elsewhere, and I was not where I needed to be when Ahab came, Obadiah would be killed by Ahab. But I told him I would stay. I would stay at that place. He just needed to go tell Ahab, "Elijah is here." And so Ahab came to where I was, and when he saw me, he said, "Is it you, O troubler of Israel?" I told him I wasn't the one troubling Israel. He and his fathers, they had been the one who were troubling Israel. They had caused the people in Israel to follow after false gods, to follow after Baal and Asherah. And they had tore down the altars for God. I wasn't the troubler. Ahab, he was the troubler. God brought me that message. He told me to tell Ahab to gather up all the prophets of Baal, all the prophets of Asherah, and bring them up to Mount Carmel. And there I would meet them. I wonder why God would choose someone like me to deliver that kind of message to Ahab. Ahab was the king of Israel. Who was I? Nobody. But Ahab did, according to what I had told him. By the word of the Lord, he gathered all the prophets that had eaten at Jezebel's table. I spoke to everyone there, gathered on Mount Carmel. How long will you falter between two options? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. No one said anything in reply. I stood alone for God on that mountain. I was the only one there to represent him. I told them that it was time to build an altar and to sacrifice. And so, there were two bulls, and I gave them first choice. They had first choice of the bull. They picked the bull they wanted. An altar was built, but no fire was put under that altar. And so the prophets of Baal called out to their God after they had built that altar. They called out from morning until noon, but there was no answer. They leaped around the altar, just gathering around, trying to get the attention of their God. But there was no answer. I had a little fun with those prophets of Baal. I cried out aloud. I said, for he is God. Either he is meditating, or maybe he's busy, or he's on a long journey, or maybe he's asleep and you need to wake him up. Well, after that, they just got more desperate. They began cutting themselves with swords and lances, hoping that their God would respond to the spilt blood, but guess what? He did not. They went on like this until evening. Their God never spoke, never answered, and no one seemed to care. Now, it was my turn. I called out for the people to come near and to break down the altar of Baal. I took the 12 stones that represent the 12 tribes of Israel and built that altar. I dug a trench around that altar. And I put wood on the altar, cut the bull to pieces, laid it on the altar. And I ordered 4 water pots to be brought. I had them to fill those water pots with water and to pour it on the sacrifice. I told them to do it a second time. I told them to do it a third time, until the altar and the sacrifice and the wood and even the trench that I had dug was filled with water. And I stood before the people and I prayed, O Lord God of Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, that I have done these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back to you again. And then the fire fell. The wood burnt. The fire was so hot it burned up everything. The sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the dust, evaporating the water out of the trench. And all the people saw the power of God, and they fell down to the ground and they started chanting, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And the prophets of Baal tried to run away. And I called out to the people to seize them before they escape. And they seized them and brought them down to the brook of Kishon, and I executed them there. I went back to Ahab. I told him to get up, to eat, to drink, for I heard the sound of rain. Ahab did as I told him. And we went back up to Mount Carmel, and my servant was looking toward the sea, but he did not see anything. I told him 7 times to look, and on the 7th time he saw it. A cloud coming out of the sea, no bigger than a man's hand. Prepare for rain. I told Ahab to prepare his chariot and to get out before the rain stopped him. Ahab rode and went to Jezebel. See, God had empowered me to face his enemies. But I wonder why God would use someone like me to make such a stand for him. Now, Jezebel, she wasn't there for the showdown. And Ahab told Jezebel all that had happened on Mount Carmel and what I did to her prophets. So she sent her messengers to me. Jezebel, she vowed revenge. She vowed that her God would do the same thing to her if by the next day at the same time she had not killed me. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And Jezebel was a scorned woman. I got the message, okay? I ran for my life. I got out of there as fast as I can. I ran down to Beersheba into the wilderness, a day's journey. And I sat there under a broom tree and I prayed. But I prayed for death. I asked God to take my life. Oh, in that moment, I just wanted to die. I felt defeated. Even though I'd come from such a high of that, now I was running from this woman, Jezebel. My fathers had died. I'm no better than they are. I was tired. I just fell asleep under that tree. And then God sent an angel. He touched me, woke me up, and the angel said, "Arise and eat." And I looked over, and there, baking on the coals, there was a cake and a jar of water sitting there for me. And that food gave me strength for the journey I was about to make, and I traveled for 40 days and 40 nights to Hebron, the mountain of God. And I went into the cave, and I spent the night there, and then God spoke to me. He said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And I told him. I had served him zealously. The children of Israel had forsaken his covenant, tore down his altars, and killed his prophets. I was the only one left. And they were coming after me. I ran from Jezebel because I was scared. I was tired. I wonder why God would use someone like me. I wonder why he would use someone like me at all. Defeated as I was on that day. I was there in that cave alone, feeling defeated, and God spoke to me, called me up to the mountain, and I went and I stood before the mountain, and the Lord passed by. The wind started blowing, and the wind was so powerful it tore through that mountain and broke the rocks to pieces, but the Lord was not in the wind. The earth began to shake, but the Lord, he wasn't in the quaking. The fire fell from heaven and surrounded that mountain, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. I stood there for a moment in silence, And then I heard it. A still, small voice. I went to the entrance of the cave and I heard his voice asking, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I told him like I did before. I told the Lord that I had served him zealously, and the children of Israel had forsaken his covenants, tore down his altars, and killed his prophets. I was the only one left, and they were coming after me. God told me, he told me to go back to the wilderness of Damascus, go over to Syria, and anoint Hazael king of Syria. He told me to go to Israel and anoint Jehu king over it. And then the Lord told me to find Elisha and anoint him as a prophet in my place. See, the Lord was building a hedge around Israel so that no one would escape, building a hedge around Ahab and all those who worshiped Baal. The Lord told me there were 7,000 in Israel that had not bowed their knee to Baal, nor had they kissed him. I wasn't alone after all. God still has his people. But I came to the mountain to hear from God, and the message was clear. God was at work, and I wasn't alone. I wonder why God would reveal himself in this way to me. So few people have seen him and experienced him this way. Why me? I did as he told me. I anointed the two kings, and I went looking for Elisha. And I found him plowing behind 12 oxen, and passed by him and threw my mantle upon him. Elijah let go of the oxen and ran after me. He said, "Please let me kiss my mother and my father, and then I will follow you." I told him to go. I've done nothing to him. Elisha turned back. He slaughtered the oxen. He boiled their flesh. He used the equipment from the oxen and gave it to the people, along with all of the oxen, because the people ate. And afterward, Elijah came with me to become my servant. God told me to go to Elisha. God always has his people. There are always people ready to stand for him. And Elijah, he belongs to God. But God used me for a time and called me to pass my mantle on to the man of his choosing. I wonder why God would use someone like me to empower someone like Elisha. He could have just done it himself. God doesn't need a succession plan. He could raise up a prophet from the stones if he wants to. But he used me. I was grateful. But God called me away for a while. And then the word of the Lord came to me again. But God told me to go back to Ahab. See, Ahab had done something terrible. He had gone to a man named Naboth and taken his vineyard. And they were both in Samaria. Naboth had a vineyard not far from the palace. And Ahab had taken it over. So I told Ahab that his blood will be spilled in the same place that he spilled the blood of Naboth. I told him, in the place where the dog licked up the blood of Naboth, dogs will lick up your blood, even yours. He was shocked because I, his enemy, had found him. I found him because he had done evil in the sight of the Lord. Calamity was about to fall upon him. He would lose all of his prosperity and be cut off from every male in Israel. The Lord would bring ruin upon his house because he had provoked the Lord to anger by making Israel sin. I took him and the Lord's plans. I told him the Lord's plans for Jezebel. That dogs would eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Dogs would eat even everything that belonged to Ahab in the city, and the birds of the air would kill that in the field. Abraham was my father and my God. And I told him, Ahab, you're going to die unless you do something. Ahab had sold himself to wickedness in the sight of the Lord. Jezebel would stir him up and cause him to sin. He had followed the idols that the Lord hates. Ahab got the message. He tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth, he fasted and mourned. God spoke to me. The Lord said, see how Ahab has humbled himself before me. Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring calamity in his days. In the days of his son, I will bring calamity on his house. Then after that message, God took me away. I vanished for a while, and then I had reappeared with that message to Ahab. Ahab would not die that day, but he would die in battle at Ramoth Gilead. Now I wonder why God would choose someone like me to bring such a hard message to Ahab. Later, God sent me with a message to another king, King Uzziah, the son of Ahab. Uzziah had fallen through some lattice work in his upper room. But he made a fatal mistake. His fatal mistake was rather than go to the God of Israel, Uzziah sent messengers to Beelzebub, the god of Ekron. He wanted to know if he would recover from his fall. I mean, talk about getting the wrong counsel. Ask the Lord God whether or not you would recover. But God told me to go to him with a message. The Lord said that he would not recover because he had inquired from Beelzebub and not the God of Israel. King Uzziah would not get up out of that bed, but he would die in his bed. So I journeyed to deliver this message. And as I was journeying, I ran into his messengers on the way to get counsel from Beelzebub. And they went back and told him the message. And Uzziah, he inquired as to the description of the man who had given them this message. And they say, a hairy man wearing a leather strap around his waist. He knew it was me. He said, it's Elijah the Tishbite. He knew exactly where this message came from. And I tell you, I might be hairy, but thank the Lord God of Israel, he didn't make me bald like Elisha. But Uzziah, he sent a delegation out to me, a captain with 50 of his men. They found me on the top of a mountain. And the captain said to me, he said, man of God, the king has said, come down. I answered and said to the captain of that 50, if I am a man of God, then let the fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. Fire came down and consumed the captain and his men. The king sends another delegation out to me. The same thing happens. Man of God, the king has said, come down. And the fire fell on them. The third time, the captain took the hint. He fell down before me and he pleaded with me. And the Lord told me to go with him. So I did. And I went and I told Isaiah the message personally. He would die according to the message that the Lord had given me. He had no son. So Ahab's house was finished. I had to deliver difficult news. Sometimes God calls us to deliver difficult news. And when we deliver difficult news, we know there's going to be a response. But we still deliver the news. Why did God choose someone like me? For just a stern message to that king. The last thing God had me to do before I left was that I went to Gilgal to meet Elijah. I told him I was going to Bethel. He should stay there in Gilgal, but he insisted to come with me. And when he went, the prophets of Bethel told him what was about to happen to me, but he knew already. I told him to stay at Bethel because God was calling me to Jericho, and so he insisted to come with me. And when we get to Jericho, the prophets there of God at Jericho told him what was about to happen, but he already knew. Then the Lord was sending me beyond the Jordan. I told Elijah to stay there in Jericho, but he insisted on going with me. And the 50 prophets of God in Jericho watched us from a distance. And I took my mantle off, I rolled it up, and I struck the waters of the Jordan. And the waters separated. And Elijah and I walked across dry ground. And I said to Elijah, I said, ask, what may I do for you before I am taken from you? And he said, please, let a double portion of your spirit fall upon me. Elijah didn't know what he was asking for. It was a dangerous thing. But I told him it was so. He would have a double portion if I were taken from him. Then suddenly, a chariot of fire with horses of fire appeared. And I was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah, he saw it happen. He saw the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. And then he saw me no more. But I could still see him. Elijah, he tore his clothes in two at what had happened. He took up the mantle that I had dropped, the mantle that had fallen on him. He struck the Jordan with the mantle and said, where is the God of Elijah? Later, Elijah told me he crossed over the Jordan. He met with the prophets at Jericho, and they bowed down before him, and they said, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. Some of them, they thought the Spirit of God had taken me somewhere else. So they went to Elijah and inquired about a search party. But Elijah knew I was gone and would not return. But the people, they kept on, they insisted, and so they went to search all over Israel for 3 days, 50 men. And when they were done, they told Elijah they could not find me. And Elijah told them, did I not say to you, do not go? because I had vanished for good. Because God called me home. But still, I wonder why. God would use someone like me to do all that I did for him. I'm just a nobody. Just a country boy from Gilead. A Tishbite. But when I think about it, I'm beginning to understand why God would use a nobody like me. Because God gets the glory when nobodies become somebodies for him. No one's more of a nobody than me. But I have become somebody. You've heard my story. You know who I am. Not bad for a Tishbite. But what about you? Are you a nobody? It's all right if you're a nobody, because you can become somebody for God. Let him use you and see all the places that he might take you. Who knows? You might be able to stand before a fine group of people like this one and tell your story one day. Well, I think I hear it. My chariot awaits.